Théodore Géricault is the shockwave at the roots of Romantic painting, a short, volatile life that exploded across canvas with the force of a storm. He painted with an urgency that felt like eyewitness testimony. The wreck of human dignity and the wild animal energy of horses, the haunted faces of the marginalized, and enormous scenes that refused classical calm. His most famous image, a collapsing raft strewn with bodies and a single frantic signal toward the horizon, changed how artists announced moral outrage on a grand scale. But Géricault is far more than one painting. He was an investigator of the extremes, of motion, of anatomy, of social pathology, producing portraits of the insane, surgical studies of severed heads, luminous equestrian scenes, lithographs, and bitterly honest studies. In every quest, he combined rigorous draftsmanship with daring composition and an obsession with truth. Today, we'll trace his restless curiosity, the studies, the scandals, the masterpieces, and the mysteries that make Géricault one of Romanticism's most electric voices. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating more educational videos like this one. Géricault was born in Rouen in 1791 and arrived in Paris as a young man determined to be an artist. Trained briefly in academic studios, he absorbed classical drawing but rejected the cool formalism of academic history painting in favor of drama, movement, psychological depth, and raw feeling. Early portraits and military studies show his appetite for action and an instinct for character. He studied contemporary events and anatomy with equal zeal, sketching constantly. His notebooks and drawings reveal the discipline beneath the drama. The painter Horace Vernet and later critics recorded him in the salons of his time, a figure equally admired and feared for the intensity of his gaze. That mix of academic skill and romantic appetite set the stage for the eruptions that followed. Nothing prepared the Parisian public for the Raft of the Medusa. The painting was Géricault's response to a recent shipwreck, a national scandal involving incompetence, abandonment, and survival by desperate means. Rather than paint a neoclassical moral allegory, Géricault turned to on-the-ground reporting. He interviewed survivors, collected testimonies, and made dozens of preparatory studies. Those studies, charcoal sketches, ink drawings, and small oil studies, functioned like journalistic evidence. He even visited morgues and sketched corpses, trying to render death with anatomical truth, and staged life-size models in his studio. The result is a towering composition where light and dark pull like tides, where clustered bodies describe a wave of human suffering, and a single figure waves a cloth toward the barely visible rescue ship on the horizon. The painting's realism and moral fury made it political as much as artistic. It became an outcry painted in oil. To understand how Géricault built that scene, look at the studies. He worked obsessively on individual heads and bodies, head after head rendered with forensic attention. Some studies show the convulsed limbs of the dying, others isolate the tense muscle of a torso. These fragments were not atmospheric doodles, but material evidence. Every gesture, every gaze was tested and retested. In certain studies, you can see the exact posture later transplanted into the final raft. He painted separate small compositions to rehearse the drama of grouping and to measure how light would model flesh in crisis. By assembling these parts into a monumental whole, Géricault transformed clinical observation into epic tragedy, a new way to make political art feel immediate and human. Parallel to his epic history painting, Géricault produced a series of intimate studies, portraits of the mentally ill, portraits of criminals, and portraits of men pushed to the margins. He didn't romanticize them. Instead, he presented their faces with empathy and a clinical eye. These works, like the portrait of a kleptomaniac, are startling for their dignity. The subjects are not caricatured, and Géricault sought to reveal character through expression, light, and the economy of brushwork. He often worked in oil on small panels, focusing on a face as if it were a case study. At the time, these portraits were read as scientific curiosities and social documents, and they contributed to broader 19th century debates about mental illness and criminality. Today, they remain radical examples of art observing life without flinching. Horses became an obsession for Géricault, not decorative props, but engines of motion and psychological intensity. He studied equine anatomy relentlessly, sketching manes, flanks, hooves, and the way muscle tenses beneath panic. The famous charging Chasseur, known in various incarnations, captures a Napoleonic officer in mid-charge, a frozen instant of heroic frenzy. His racing scenes, like the Epsom Derby, are less about sport and more about energy and risk, the whirl of hooves and the precariousness of human triumph. In smaller drawings and lithographs, he investigated how a horse rears, how fright distorts a rider's posture. These studies gave his large canvases a kinetic accuracy and a visceral power unmatched by many of his contemporaries. Géricault's curiosity pushed him toward subjects most artists avoided. He produced grisly anatomical studies, severed heads, cadaver studies, detailed renderings of wounds. To some viewers, these works were morbid. To Géricault, they were tools. He believed that an honest depiction of suffering demanded anatomical truth. His drawings of 4 studies of a severed head and other sheets show a controlled fascination, careful line work, dramatic contrasts, an attempt to translate the finality of death into a language of form. He also produced lithographs and prints that circulated these studies more widely, bridging the private severity of his sketchbooks and the public life of his paintings. Beyond giant history paintings and anatomical studies, Géricault explored other avenues: lithography, genre scenes, and sporting pictures. His lithographs reproduced scenes with a starkness that suited his draftsmanship. He painted 2 boxers in a series of works that capture physical confrontation stripped of narrative, muscles flexed, faces concentrated, light, sharp, and sculptural. These works reveal his lifelong attraction to physical struggle, whether between men, between humans and nature, or within a single human body. The diversity of his output, from prints and portraits to horses and fighters, shows an artist obsessed with energy and motion and the visible traces of emotion. Géricault's relentless inquiry took a physical toll. He was a man of volatile temperament and frail health. He pushed himself into dangerous places, often exposing himself to disease and exhaustion in pursuit of truth. Late in life, he suffered illness and an injury that compounded his decline. Accounts tell of his feverish working, withdrawing from salon life, and finally dying in Paris in 1824 at just 32. Portraits painted at the end of his life, and the famous depiction of him on his deathbed, capture both the special ferocity of his artistic project and the tragedy of an interrupted career. What he left behind was compact but seismic, a model for artists who would follow. Géricault's impact outlived his life. He helped shift French painting toward romantic expression, emotional immediacy, vivid color contrasts, and compositions that favored feeling over classical repose. Artists such as Delacroix absorbed his drama and daring. Later generations of realists and even modernists cited him for his insistence on truth and his willingness to make the viewer uncomfortable. His Raft reappeared in cultural memory again and again, from reproductions to public debates about art and politics. Today, Géricault is recognized not only for a few marquee works, but for his method, rigorous study allied with moral engagement and a fierce empathy for human vulnerability. Théodore Géricault remains a study in artistic urgency, an artist who believed that painting had to witness, record, and indict. He turned field research into composition, anatomical scrutiny into pathos, and public scandal into a visual morality play. His canvases still challenge us. They force us to look at suffering, to recognize motion as evidence, and to accept that beauty and violence are often braided together. As you look at his studies and finished paintings, notice the relentless looking beneath surface appearances. That is his lasting gift. If you return to the Raft, the portraits of the marginalized, the charging horses, or the stark studies, you'll find an artist who worked like a reporter, a scientist, and a poet, all at once. Thanks for listening.